No, flexing. Happy Feast of Noise, Feast of Trumpets, Feast of New Yearish. That was pathetic. Let's try that again. You gonna try it?
Already did.
Oh, okay. Let's move on. The Feast of Truah is literally a feast of noise, but has picked up a couple of other names over the centuries. It is often called the Feast of Trumpets and is known in modern times as the Jewish New Year, even though it takes place in the 7th month of the Jewish year. And there's all kinds of apologists that try to tell you why that's all correct and blah, blah, blah. No, it's not. It's absolutely wrong. There's nothing true about it. But if you want to have a New Year's practice service, no, this is not Rosh Hashanah. That you won't find that in the Bible. It's not there. It's not real. It's not a feast of God. What the feast of God is Teruah, and that does not mean trumpets. Shofar, that's a trumpet. Teruah is noise, noise, noise. As I teach the significance of this ancient biblical feast, I will probably say the words trumpet or shofar, and each oh, you girls, don't you have a couple more that you can blow 4 of them at once or something? It didn't help much. All right, so each time you hear these words, you may blow your noise maker. Please blow them quickly and stop so that I can keep the message moving. Thank you so much for your help in this endeavor. All right, at this time, please stand and cover yourselves for the reading of our scriptures. We do this when we read the actual Hebrew scriptures because they're the only actual scriptures. Translations of these are not scriptures. They're translations of the scriptures. Just saying. So those of you who believe that you've been reading the scriptures your whole life and you don't speak a word of Hebrew and can't read it in Hebrew, you have never read the Bible in your life. What you've read is a translation of the Bible. Just throwing that out there. All right, we're in Vayikra, which is also known as Leviticus to the uninitiated, and we're in chapter 23, verse 24, and it says, Debar el b'nei Yisrael lemor bechodesh, not kodesh, chodesh, hashvi'i rather, be'echad lachodesh yiyeh lachem Shabbaton, not Shabbat, but Shabbaton, Zikron Teruah Mikra Kodesh. And then we move to Shemot, which is also known as Exodus, chapter 19, verses 18 and 19. Probably sounds familiar to those of you who attended this morning, but I need to say it again. The Har Sinai Ashan Kulo Mipnei Asher Yarad Alive Yahweh. Ba'esh va'ya'al ashano ke'eshen ha'kiveshan va'yecherad kol ha'har ne'od. Lost place, sorry about that. Va'yehi kol ha'shofar. Cool. Holech וחזק מאוד משה ידבר והאלוהים יעננו בקול. And finally, I think, nope, not finally. Next, Yeshayahu, which is known as Isaiah, chapter 40, verses 3 and 4. Kol korei bamidbar panu derech Yahweh yashru ba'arava Mesila lelohenu kol ge yinese nase vechol har vegi ve'ayish palu ve'haya he akov lemishor ve'har hasim ve'erle vike'ah. And then Shemot, yes, and finally Shemot, which is also known as Exodus 24, verses 6 through 8. Vayikach Moshe Chatzi Hadam Vayasem Ba'aganot Vachatzi Hadam Zarach al Hamizbeach Vayikach Sefer Haberit Vayikra Be'aznei Ha'am Vayomru Kol Asher Diber Yahweh Va'asher Venishma Vayikach Moshe et Hadam Vayizroch al Ha'am Vayomer Hine Dam Haverit Asher Karat Yahweh Imachem al kol ha-devarim ha'eleh. And you may be seated. Rob, you read Hebrew like a dork. Yes, I do. And I do it on purpose. And that's so that everybody can hear every single syllable of every single word. It helps students to pick it up. So I do it as a courtesy. So if you want to complain about it, blame Tina. All right, our first word, where are we? We're in Vaikra. We're in chapter 23, verse 24. And our first word in that is daber, daber, daber. It's setting in a row, ranging in order to lead, to guide, especially to lead flocks or herds, to pasture, to rule, to direct the people. It's the word for speak. So why would they say all that about speak? Because these are words that lead and they guide. They're not words of jest. They're not words of mystery. They're not words that make no sense to anybody. They are very thoughtfully arranged words that will lead people to certain understanding, right? All right. Do something with my mouse there. Okay, there we go. Our next word is El B'nai, to the children. Yisrael, that's Israel, if you don't know. Lemor, saying. So speak to the children of Israel, saying. B'chodesh, not Kodesh, Chodesh. That's the lunar month. So in the new moon, Ha-Shevi'i, the seventh new moon, Be'echad, in the first La Chodesh, in the first new moon. So what did we just say? In the seventh new moon, in the first new moon, it will be yeh lachem, to you, Shabbaton, Sabbath, Sabbath. I can't make that S sound loud enough. There's an S on the end of Sabbath because it's in plural. It's a Trinity Sabbath. It is a rest for me, myself, and I. Just saying. Now it's in plural because it goes on forever. It's not because you have several Sabbaths, which we, if you think about it, we do, because the Sabbath began last night at sundown, right? And as the sun is going down tonight, another Sabbath begins, because this is the Sabbath that's for this celebration. So there are two Sabbaths, but that doesn't happen every year. That because we're following the lunar calendar. Why? Because God told us to. That's what the Bible is all about. That's why you see Jews watching the moon, the moon and the stars. What?
When the sun goes down tomorrow night, because the Sabbath is Monday.
That's another Sabbath.
Okay.
Anyway, you get all these Sabbaths, but it's not because there's a whole bunch of Sabbaths connected with this. It's that it is in plural because it goes on forever. That's why you have, that's one of only really two reasons why you have plurality in Hebrew. It's not about it being plural. It's about it being eternal, which is, if you think about it, the same as the other rule. You say God in plural because he's a living God. Well, what's that make? What are we talking about? He's an eternal God. That's what a living God is. He doesn't die. Anyway, our next words, Zichron, that's your memorial, your memory, you remember. It's a memento, a celebration in particular. Teruah. Yeah, I did say the word. Well, I'm not getting a lot of help here. Give me one of those. I'll help myself out.
No, it's bad.
What?
It's bad.
Yeah, but I have the microphone.
Yeah, it still sounds bad.
We don't have any more?
Yeah, it's turn that up to the loudness.
My Talmudim are questioning my decisions tonight.
Sorry. Oh, okay.
Thank you. So our next word is teruah. I don't know if that helped or not. All right, it's a tumult. It's a loud noise, especially a joyful noise, rejoicing, joyful acclamation with which people receive their king. It's also a warlike cry in battle. They still do that in some countries today. The Jews did that a very long time ago. That's been going on a long time, just saying. But they also use that same noise when they were happy as they did when, it's time to go to war. And it comes from the root word ruah, which means to make a loud noise. Anyway, our next word is mikra, which is a convocation, kodesh, which is holy, so it's a holy convocation. So my translation, speak to the children of Yisrael and to the children of the Christian world and to the Hindus. No, it just says Israel. Saying, in the new moon of the 7th month, there will be to you Sabbaths in plural, Shabbaton, memorial celebrations, holy assemblies. And I'll ask the same question to you tonight that I asked this morning. Why is this a memorial celebration? Some of you already know the answer. All right, so if we move on to 19, or Shemot, Exodus 19, 18 and 19. The translation I have is, and Mount Sinai was completely covered with smoke because Yahweh, he's the groom, descended upon it in passion. Do you remember that? Passion is the word. The word here is esh, and it mimics the sound of a fire. Shh, the crackling and the sound. I don't know. I can't make my crackle. So anyway, but when it's used of a person or when it's used of God, when you're comparing him to human attributes, God is the God that sees. He has eyes to see. He has ears to hear, a mouth to touch, and he has a heart to fire. He has a heart to passion. So this word is passion. It's being used of God. He came down on top of this thing. He's descending on the top of this mountain in fire. So it's speaking of him, not the fire. He came down with passion. And the smoke ascended so now the smoke is going up, God's coming down, and he's full of passion. And the smoke ascended, it says, as the smoke of a smelting furnace. I mean, this was like a pyroclastic flow. It was intense. And the whole mountain. So if you ever wonder why God didn't let anybody else come up the mountain, told Moses, don't let anybody go up past that road, blah, blah, blah. Because at that point, every one of them are below that. Because if they'd gone up when that was happening, what would have happened? That joyous occasion wouldn't have been very joyous after that, would it? Just saying, you've got your answer right there in the story. So the smoke ascended, it was a smelting pot, and the whole mountain trembled greatly. The sound of the shofar, almost nothing came out. All right, the shofar was continuous and became extremely loud. And then Moshe spoke, and God answered him by a voice. I mean, wow. You got smoke going up. God's coming down. I don't know what they saw, but they were seeing something. And then Moshe says something, and God speaks. And when God speaks, the earth trembles. The rocks shake. They break. This was terrifying to people. But it was a noisy, passion-filled event. And again, why is it a memorial celebration, not a celebration of something in the future? Because Yahweh came to Sinai to consummate, not to betroth. This was supposed to be something that was finished, not something that was going to take a long time to finish. But Yahweh came with the shofar the very first time. But because the children of Yisrael, I keep thinking I need to lean over because the children of Yisrael refused to hear God's voice, the Hebrew marriage now takes place in two phases: Erusin, which is betrothal, and Nisuin, which is consummation. So, there's this belief, and I've heard people say it over the years many times, that, back in the olden days, the little girls get married when they're 12 and start popping out the kids, because their life expectancy wasn't very long, blah, blah, blah. There's no evidence of any of that. Show it to me. You can't. All you can do is say some guy in the 1800s wrote about it. Yeah, where was his evidence? Well, he said to some other guy in the 1700s said it. Yeah, where was his evidence? Well, he said some guy in the 1600s said it. Where was his evidence? Well, he made it up. No, betrothal could happen before a child. Well, probably not before, because back then you wouldn't have known if it was a boy or a girl. Nowadays it could. But the girl could be a day old and be betrothed right there and then. Kings and queens did that a lot. Their families, when the other kings and the other queens were pregnant, the king of one nation knows that the queen of another nation is pregnant, and he wants his son to marry this girl because his son is 1 year old and this girl is about to be born or is just born. They might betroth their kids, which in their world they were legally married at that point, but that didn't mean that they lived together. They didn't. They weren't raised together. They didn't live in the same house. They didn't shake hands. They didn't kiss. They didn't even know each other. In fact, they didn't know each other until the night they got married, most of the time. And that's true of Jewish culture. And this is the stuff you can actually find evidence for, if you're so inclined. I would be interested to see somebody Google that, see what they come up with. Probably find something, because I'm telling you what's real. So anyway, they would betroth these kids so that when they got older, they would marry, and then the two kings wouldn't have to worry about the other one attacking the other one. Because the king whose daughter is married to the other guy is not going to attack that kingdom. And the kingdom whose son is married to, the other, they're not going to attack each other. That's why Solomon was married to so many women. It was a military expedient thing for him to do. So anyway, that's the betrothal. And in the betrothal, the man would come and he would, well, it may not be the man. It could be the father of a young man it's time to get a bride, or it could be a servant of the father, because think about Abraham. He sent his servant, right? That was a very common thing to do. And then also in the Bible, a couple of the fathers did this for their sons, if you can remember who I'm talking about. So that happened. And then, yes, there were times when the son did it. All of those things were perfectly fine. Nobody got upset about that. So they would go, anybody home? Heard you had a little girl over here. It's about 20. And so they would get together and they would literally negotiate the marriage. Now, we think of negotiation as something you do in a cell. And people talk in those terms when they talk about the marriage, but that's not what this was. The father of the daughter knew that by law, that woman was that man's possession. Now, that did not mean she was his slave. It did not mean that that he could do anything to her that he wanted. None of the cultures did that. What that meant was she had to be faithful to him, not her father. His possession. Had nothing to do with anything remotely like what we might think of today. So they negotiate this, and the father, what he's worried about is not that his daughter will be, loyal. The word I was looking for was loyal. The father's not worried about the daughter being loyal to this man because the father's Jewish. His daughter's he's going to be talking to a Jewish man. He's not going to sell his daughter off, if you want to use those terms, to somebody from some other religion that's going to make her worship idols. Jews didn't do that. I mean, yeah, you got your what's the word I'm looking for? Your exceptions to the rule, but for the most part, a father wouldn't do that to his daughter. So what his concern is that this man can actually provide a home for his daughter to live in, that he knows this man has the means whereby to feed her and their subsequent children, and that they can be happy and live in the same lifestyle, in the same upbringing, in the same religion. That's what the father is doing. So he's not going to take some guy from some other country that he knows nothing about what they're doing and nothing about how they worship and all that. He's not going to do it. Other nations obviously did it, or maybe they thought of the Jewish life as a better lifestyle than their own. I don't know. But Solomon married a lot of women that were not Jewish, I'm just saying. But anyway, that's what this whole negotiation was. So once they got it worked out, that man would have to go get someone to write it down. And if you go far enough back, it's somebody with a hammer and a chisel. You know what I'm saying? He's got a little chisel that's made out of bronze, that's copper mixed with something other metal, I think, and probably just a big stick, boing, 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 right? And then as you got further this way, then they came up with papyrus, and I guess they wrote on that with ink. And the papyrus really did come before the lambskin, because that goes way back to Mesopotamia, to tell you the truth. In Mesopotamia, they'd take wet clay, and that was a much easier way to do things, and right into the clay, and then they'd fire the clay, and they'd have evidence of the contract. But most of biblical history, Jewish history in the biblical period is what I'm trying to say, that was written on leather. It was written on lambskin or deer skin. Could be any skin as long as it had been properly prepared. And then they would write with the ink and write this thing out. So he had to go get this done, and it was slow and it was expensive. So he wasn't going to put sneaky little phrases in there to get out of some agreement he made, because he'd get caught and then he'd have to either go redo it, in the hope that the dad, while he was, the problem you would have with doing something like that is the dad catches it and he says, "Get out of my house." "Oh, it was just a misunderstanding. I swear, just a misunderstanding. Let me go back and get it done." "All right, you go do that." So you go back and you pay for it a second time, and he's had plenty of time to think about that and stew over that. And by the time you get back, the answer is no. So you're not going to risk something like that. You're going to have it's going to say exactly what you guys agreed upon. So that's going to take some time. It takes a lot of money. So that's something they're real careful about. That's called the ketubah, the wedding document. That's been negotiated. Now it's the witness of the marriage covenant. And it has the expectations it has in it what the daughter can expect from her husband, and what the husband can expect from the daughter, and other things that are important to the families. For instance, if the man went around beating the stuffing out of his wife all the time, she might make them put into that contract, "He will never hit my daughter." He'll never hit his wife. And If he does, after agreeing not to, that's grounds for divorce. And even back then, there was alimony and child support to pay. That comes from Judaism, not from some other culture. We're the ones that invented that. So, and it goes back to our very beginnings. Anywho, so he's done this. He's once the paper is brought back and he reads it out loud, just like Moshe did at Sinai. Then this woman is either going to say yes or no, because in the end, it's her decision, not her parents' decision, not that man's decision. It's up to the parents to negotiate the deal. But in the end, she can still say no. Now, as a token of this man's appreciation, as a token of this man's love in some cases, but and just as a traditional thing, this man brought gifts when he got there the first time. And these gifts would be animals. He'd bring maybe a cow, maybe a couple of goats, maybe both, depends on how much money he had, maybe some material, maybe some ducks and geese, who knows. And he's going to bring this, and he's going to give this girl these gifts, and those are called the gifts of Mohar. Because Mohar is the time of the setting apart, the time of the purification, right? And no, they did not go through and do the things that Ruth did to purify. That's what the Persians did, not what the Jews did. Esther. I said the wrong girl. Esther. So you don't read the book of Esther and think that you're learning how Jews do this. No, you're learning how the Persian, idol-worshiping, godless Persians did it. Now, I want to say it that way because there are people out there who have made a complete career out of going church to church, synagogue to synagogue, and wherever else they go, selling their snake oils as if they were from God himself. Wow. Anyway, that bothers me. I was used by someone who did that once, and I'm still upset about that, and that was a very long time ago. So anyway, everything's done. The negotiation is finished. He's read the document. She knows what she's getting into because he daber. He ranged those words in order to get her to a place where she could understand, wholly and completely understand what she's getting herself into. This is not something that you read to a 9-year-old girl. It's not even something you read to a 12-year-old. This is what you read to a grown woman who's ready for marriage. Anyway, so once all that's done, she doesn't say yes and jump up and down and clap her hands like a cheerleader. What happens next is the man pours a glass of wine. And this is very important because he'd fill that glass all the way up to the top. All the way. And he would turn his back to this woman because this is the last thing they need to do to become a married couple. Even though at this point, they're not even going to shake hands. And he's going to drink it down to the halfway point. I'm a little over halfway. Sorry, it's supposed to be halfway. I'm the one that told more, not a more. Must have been thirsty. I don't know. I was trying to see the halfway point from above, I guess. But anyway, the point is he's supposed to drink around half of it. And then it became tradition that he dropped one last gift in the cup. And she needed to know about this, because if she doesn't know about this and she just swigs this stuff down, it'd be the spitting and the choking. Anyway, it was funnier in my head. So she would drink it down, being careful not to swallow whatever it was that was in there. It could be anything. It was usually a ring. I'll give you that. It was usually, some ring she could put on her finger. Well, actually, earlier on, it was a ring she'd stick in her nose. Yes, that's the way they used to do it. They wore it in their nose. Down here like a cow, the way a cow does it. Not up here so that when they sneeze, the snot blows out sideways. And don't tell me it doesn't. I have a niece that did that, and that's exactly what happened. Blew out the side, and it was gross. I was never so glad I was on the other side of another person in my life. Anyway, so they wore them down below. Rachel, the story of Rachel, she was the one that Abraham sent his servant to go betroth, right, for his son. She stuck a nose ring, not a finger ring, but a nose ring. So it goes a little bit different if the man's not there, right? Obviously, because the cup has to be. They drink that between the woman and the man, not the servant and the woman. Huh? No, that would be creepy. But anyway, if the man's the one that's doing it, so he's filled it up. He drank it down half. He hands it to her, and when he hands it to her, he says, "With this cup, we are betrothed." And then she takes that cup and either throws it in his face. No, she won't do that. Because if she don't want to marry him, she ain't going to take the cup. And that's going to be a really awkward moment for everybody. But if she takes the cup and she drinks it down, she pulls out the ring, or let's say he's a coal miner, maybe she pulls out a chunk of coal. Like I said, it could be anything. There were no rules about what it had to be. And she would take that thing, she'd drink it down, she takes out her gift, and at that very moment, they are a married couple. They are legally married, even though he's going to leave, and she may not see him for a very long time. Generally, it wasn't really all that long of a time, because if the son did it, that meant that he was of marrying age and he was looking for a woman of marrying age. He was not looking for some bride. He was going to have to wait 10 or 15 years to betroth, to marry, right? That's not going to happen. If the father went and did it, or the father sent someone to do it, the father might have done it when his son was, say, 12, and so the man's going to be looking for a 12-year-old. And that's going to take some time. And maybe the father does that because the father knows that he's coming to the end of his life, or fears it because he feels so bad, he's been having heart palpitations or whatever. That's generally why I would think they would, and I have to just say I would think here, why they would do it so early. Don't really know. Let's put that down. It's starting to hurt my hand. That was kind of a long way to go, but that's how this whole thing gets started. And why the cup of wine? Well, we read about it this morning. We're going to read about it again. Oh, I did put all the Arusa stuff in here. See if I forgot anything. Once the bride accepted the marriage proposal, the Arusa began, that time of setting apart. This was known as the time of sanctification, the time of setting apart. It had several names over the years. It was a time for the bride to prepare her body, her clothing, her heart, and mind before entering into the second phase of marriage. Once the couple drank the cup of Erisine, they were legally married, as I've said. She put on a veil and began her life as a set-apart bride. The veil said, hands off. Everybody knew that the deal had been done, the paper had been signed, the wine had been consumed. Don't touch this woman. But they didn't kiss. They didn't shake hands. They didn't even hug. She was now under her husband's authority, believe it or not, even though she did not live with him. The bride stayed in her father's house, and the groom went home to his father's house. The groom left provisions. Those were the gifts I was talking about, and that's why he left them. They were for her, because she was his responsibility. So the reason why he would bring goats and cows and hay and whatever is because that was to provide for the woman, because she was now his responsibility. That's what they mean by all of that. She was his acquired possession. The Arusa, the time of the preparation, the time of the setting apart, it was a time for her to study her ketubah. She needed to know exactly what was expected of her in her relationship, and she needed to know what she could expect from her groom. Doesn't that sound exactly like what we're doing studying Torah? The Torah teaches us exactly what we can expect from our groom, God, and what he should be able to expect from us. And we should study that for that very purpose. And to sum up here, the Arusa is the time to prepare the clothing, the heart, the body, the mind. Rabbi Yosef ben Yeshua said, "Then shall the Malchut Hashamayim be like 10 virgins, which took their nerot," that's their lamps, "and went out to meet their bridegroom. And 5 of them were stupid." No, they were foolish, it says. "And 5 of them were wise." So you had 5 young ones and 5 old ones, right? No. For the foolish took their narot, but did not take oil for them. So you think about it. You got this oil lamp. The only one I have in here is 5,000 years old. That's going back a little far. But remember, you've seen them. They're about this, yay big around. Where am I over here? About this big around. And have the little bitty loop here. It's got the little thing that sticks out. And you set it on fire. Well, those are made out of that sand and clay over there. So before you use them, you wet them. Then you put the oil in and the wick, and then you light the wick. If you don't wet them, that oil is going to seep through, and you can have a fire. So you have to know that when you do those things. But there wasn't very much oil you could put in them. They were just for light, right? So, because the more oil you put in, the brighter, your light does not get brighter, right? So they make these things, you put very little oil in. So if you're going on a journey, you have to take your lamp, for one thing, so that you can see. It's your flashlight, if you will. And you have to have another little jug, like yay big, so that that's filled with oil, so that you can replenish your oil. Anyway, while the bridegroom delayed his coming, they lived life normally. That I say it that way because it was a Hebrew idiom. It said they were all idle and slept. No, they did not just sit around and sleep. Come on, people. They had to go to the bathroom, didn't they? They had to eat, didn't they? If they were going to eat back in that day, didn't they have to work all day to make that happen? Yes. No, it's an idiom. It just means they just lived a normal life. And in the middle of the night, there was a shout. Looking for the horn. And that shout was, "Hine bahechatan ze'ene likrato." Behold, the bridegroom. Go out and meet him. Then the virgins arose and trimmed their nerot and they blew their shofar. I had to throw it in there because it's not there. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our nerot are running out." And the wise responded, no, because there won't be enough if we give what we have to you. Go and buy some. Hurry, run. I'm paraphrasing. And while they were gone to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him into the wedding feast, and the door was shut. And later came the rest of the virgins, saying, "Lord, Lord, open up to us, let us in." But he answered and said, "Amen, I say to you, I do not know you." Why does the groom not just wait for the unwise 5? I mean, 10's better than 5, right? Let's compare this to something our Yochanan ben Zakkai said. This may be compared to a king who summoned his servants to a banquet without appointing a time. The wise ones adorned themselves and sat at the door of the palace. For, said they, by the way, this is Talmud, "Is anything lacking in a royal palace?" The fools went about their work, saying, "Can there be a banquet without preparations?" Suddenly, the king desired the presence of his servants, The wise entered adorned, while the fools entered soiled. The king rejoiced at the wise, but was angry with the fools. Those who adorned themselves for the banquet ordered he, let them sit, eat and drink. But those who did not adorn them banquet, let them stand and watch. Son Sino, Babylonian Talmud, Tractate Shabbat, Folio 153a. What I'm trying to tell you, these are the same two stories. There is no difference in them. So the end of this is, watch therefore, for you do not know the day or the hour. So why are some brides left behind? Because these are both telling the same story, because this is an idiom. There's not really someone getting 10 brides and 5 of them were dumb and 5 of them were smart. This is a parable. It's idiomatic. You're not supposed to take this literally. You're supposed to understand the hidden gem, the hidden secret here to what they're talking about. How long could it have taken for someone to wait for 5 girls to get back from town with their oil? It depends on how far they live from it. All of the brides in this mashal, in this parable, entered into a covenant with the groom. The lack of preparation of the 5 unwise shows the value they placed on their groom and their covenant with him. You see how the two stories are exactly the same story? All of the rabbim, the sages from before the time of the 1st century all the way through to the Dark Ages, told the same meshalim. They all told the same parables. They just changed them a little to make them their own. The fact that they did not prepare proves that they did not enter into the Arusa. They did not live a set-apart life. It does not matter how clean they are on the outside. They will be left behind if their heart has not changed completely and forever. Those who enter into the Arusa are not looking for a fire insurance policy. They are not looking for the minimum requirements for entry. Those who enter into the Arusa do so because their heart is truly changed. They believe with their whole heart. They confess with their whole mouth. They prepare. They live a set-apart life. They do not talk about it. They actually live it. So when that best man comes back, let me tell you what he does. It's in this book. It's titled Yeshayahu in chapter 40, verse 3. Verses 3 and 4. That'd be Isaiah, in case you don't know. A voice crying in the wilderness, return to the path of God. What's the path? I've said it before. I'm going to say it again. When God was betrothing Yisrael and not consummating as he had hoped, Moshe went to God to get the ketuvah written in stone, because that's far enough back they were doing the hammer chisel thing. And all of a sudden, God says, step back, I'm about to get mad, and it's going to kill a lot of people. Moshe said, what you so upset about, God? We're having a good time here. Oh, no. Those people that you brought out of Mitzrayim, that you brought out of Egypt, they have mixed the holy with the unholy. They have mixed the impure with the pure. They have committed a grave, grave sin. They have turned quickly from the path. What's the path? Well, what just happened? Moshe stood down there and said, God said, if you're going to enter into a covenant with me, you cannot kill, you cannot steal, you cannot commit adultery, you can't want your neighbor's stuff, and so forth, so on. You'll keep the Sabbath holy, and so forth and so on. And it went way beyond that, because it was the whole law, not just the 10 Commandments, by the way. That's the path. Because when he got to the end of that, the people said, all that he has said we will do and obey. So he was going up and getting it written down. He was getting the ketubah. They've removed themselves from the path with lightning speed, if you will. And then it says, beat a path directly to God. Well, actually it says, make straight in the desert a highway for our God. That's an idiom for beat a path directly to God. Then it says, remove everything that comes between you and God. Because again, it's an idiom. Literally, the idiom says, every valley exalted, every mountain and hill made low, every crooked place to be straight, and every rough place to be level. And yes, you should read that as level. So that's the idiom for remove everything that comes between you and God. Obviously, God had someone who would go before him and prepare the way for his return. So because of this, the best man goes before the groom to prepare the way for his return. Once the time came to enter into Nisuin, consummation, the best man and his entourage would go 3/4 of a mile ahead of him. That's what I've been told. I have no proof of that particular point, but it would make sense. The groom came with shouts of joy, the voice of the best man, and the shofar. This we know from both Talmud and New Testament writings. And by the way, the stuff in the Talmud is it's Mishnaic, it's Tanaitic, so it's 300 CE. It's between 100 CE and 300 CE. So these are people who would still be living the same lifestyle that they were living in Jerusalem in the Second Temple period, is all I'm trying to tell you. It's not the stuff that comes out of the Dark Ages that's in your Talmud, right? The Talmud has the part that's the Mishnah. That's the Tanaitic stuff that's very, very much in the time of the temple. Everything after that, all that commentary comes way after the fact. So that's questionable. What I'm talking about is there's no reason to question it. This is the way they saw it, especially when you have a completely different set of documents saying the same thing. The groom sometimes lived far enough away, of course, that he wouldn't arrive until the middle of the night. When this happened, the groom was called the thief in the night. You know, we've been there, we've done this already, right? We just talked about this morning. There's drums. People are beating on drums. People are playing tambourines. People are playing shofarim. This was a terrible choice. We'll have to get something a little better next year. That or we need to learn how to play these things. I don't know. Anyway, all of this noise is going on. He did not sneak in the house and run off with the girl. And nobody knew what happened. They're all up, oh my God, I hope it was the groom and not some bad guy. Again, an idiom. The thief in the night was not a real thief in the night. Nobody was stolen. Anyway. No one knew what the day or the hour was that he was going to come back for her. That was up to him. Well, literally, it was up to his dad. But the point being, she didn't know. They didn't have telephones. They didn't have telegraphs. They didn't have pigeons to send back and forth. Although probably in that Second Temple period, late Second Temple period, that was possible. I don't know that it ever happened. But as soon as I say it's impossible, somebody will come out and show me someone who talked about it in the first century. Anyway, they didn't have social media. So she didn't know when he was coming. He didn't even know how long it was going to take him to get there, because maybe he got home in 8 hours the last time he left there and got home, and maybe this time, because he's got an entourage, it takes him 2 days and he gets there at 3 in the morning. I mean, you don't know the day or the hour. I'm thinking frozen up on you guys. Okay, now there's a book. It's called Yeshashav. Well, there's actually two of them. And the writer of that book, and this is my translation of what he said this, because Yahweh himself, and it did use his name, will come down from the heavens with a loud, passionate noise, the Esh word, of rejoicing with the voice of the Prince of Messengers, that's the best man, and with the shofar. No, it's, I think. Oh, we're trying too hard. Anyway, it comes down with that noisemaker of God. And it says the dead who entered into the Arusa were anointed. They will rise up first. Ooh, I over translated this one to help us understand what was going on. Because I was thinking, I didn't say this but this morning, but I realized this is a amplified translation. Because I've added a few words in here that mean the same thing as their previous word to try to help you get the idea. So the idiom here is the dead in the anointed will rise up first. The dead in the anointed. So you can say Mashiach. The word is actually anointed, not the anointed one. But Mashiach, remember God said, I'm God. Beside me there is no Mashiach. So you could say God himself if you want to. That's the idiom. The meaning here is those who entered into the Arusa, those who are anointed, will rise up first. The appointed ones have their nerot, their lamps, full, and they have a container to refill their nerot for the long journey. Didn't the others make it to the door and knock? I mean, they made the journey. While they will not enter into the secret place, the wedding chamber, they will live in the master's house. Think about it. Let us in. Now, they weren't asking to get into the gates. They weren't asking if we can get into the city. They were asking if they could get into the chamber. No, they're not going to go there. Here are the words that the best man shouts. Oh, I already said this. Behold, the bridegroom, go out and meet him. So to recap, the bride was not stolen in the night without the knowledge of everyone around her. She did not know when he would come, but she did know he would. Now this phase began when the time came for the groom to go get his bride. It was fully entered into when the marriage was consummated in the intimate place, the note, which is translated as mansion, I think, in the New Testament letters. It's a terrible translation. It's intimate place. Hebrews enter into this phase under a chuppah, of course, which represented the cloud at Sinai. The chuppah was a large white prayer shawl. Usually they stood under that in that girl's backyard. Bride and groom would share a cup of wine and they would drink it, right? So this is called the passing of the cup. And it's based on the whole Moshe put half the blood in it's Shemot 24. Moshe put half the blood in the basin and half of it he sprinkled on the altar. And then he took the says scroll of the covenant and read it. So that would indicate that after having chiseled all of that stuff in stone, he also wrote it on the back of lambskin, which is completely possible in his time. Though again, it's not probable. It's more probable that he's actually holding the stone tablets. And by the way, the stone tablets, they were not big gravestones. The stone tablets of this kind actually exist to this day from that time period. And they're about this big. Just saying. And Moses, he took that blood and he sprinkled it on the people, said, behold, the blood of the covenant which Yahweh has made with you concerning these words. So once all that's done, the wedding party headed to the man's house. He's come for and they're going back. They're headed to his house where it's going to be consummated. When the couple arrive at the note, they would go inside and close the door. I should tell you something I forgot to tell you this morning. Remember I said the best man stands there with his ear to the door? He's waiting for something very specific. And it's very important that you know this. They take that chuppah that they stood under in her backyard and they lay that thing down on the bed. I've had some people argue with me about the validity of that, but the proof is in the pudding, as they say. What was the token of marriage? It was the blood on the shawl, the wedding shawl. That's in the Bible. So we know that's exactly what they did. Anyway, so they laid it on the bed. The marriage was consummated. When it was over with, the groom inspected it for blood. If there was no blood, the woman could be put to death publicly, or she could put to death privately, or he could provide his own blood, because maybe it's his fault. Maybe he loves her anyway and is willing to forgive her in that moment. Who knows? But we know, you know humans, they did this. But now, once the blood was on it, this is why there's a man at the door. Because he's waiting to hear a very specific word. He's waiting to hear Shalom. Shalom. What does that mean in English? It is complete. Or it is done. Or it is finished. I'll let you stew on that for a second. Are you prepared for the return of your groom? Or will you run from him when you see the fire and hear the shofar? Have you prepared your heart, or is it still hard? Have you prepared your mind, or have you been too busy thinking about COVID this year? Is your lamp full, or have you let it dwindle? Do you have extra oil for the journey? Because it's not over yet. Are you counting on having time to pursue something at the last minute? Are you ready to drink the cup of passion? Are you his and his alone? Have you been learning the terms of your ketubah? Are you ready and anticipating his return? Will he know you, or do you just look the part? Will you travel there with him, or will you be knocking at his door afterwards? Will this year's celebration be yet another memory of your non-committal? Will it just be another memorial? Or will this year's celebration be the memory of the day that you entered into the passion with God? Will you give into his passion? Will you drink the cup of passion? Drink the cup of passion with us. Oh, not my favorite. Just like the rabbim used to say when they handed it, because everybody drank out of the same cup back in the day. I should have said it a while ago and I forgot. Take this, drink it all. Shalom is shalom, y'all.